What is up, everyone? This is your host, Eric Holtzman, and welcome to the Mindful Motion Podcast. What is up, everybody? I'm here with my friend and colleague, Dominick Nusdeu. He's a certified muscle system specialist. He's also a 4-degree black belt in Jiu Jitsu, and he's the founder and owner of Theorem Fitness and Jiu Jitsu Club out in Florida. And he helps people basically be strong, resilient, and more confident in their bodies while staying injury-free and pain-free. How you doing? Dominick?
Doing great, Eric. How are you, man? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good, man. End of the week. I'm happy for the weekend to be around the corner.
Awesome.
We just talked real briefly in the waiting room here about what a 4-degree black belt is. Could you just kind of reiterate what that was? Because I actually never knew this.
Yeah. So in jiu-jitsu, it typically takes about, on average, 10 years to get a black belt. And then once you receive your black belt, assuming you keep up with, a qualified instructor of your own, like your own quote unquote master, sensei, professor, whatever word you want to use. There's different words, different titles. So at the beginning, the first stripe is you get 3 years as a black belt, you get your first stripe. Then another 3 years, you get your second stripe. Then another 3 years, you get your third stripe. And then another 5, you get your fourth, and then so on and so forth. So the stripes are dependent on how long you've actually been a black belt. So I've been a black belt since 2008. So if you do the math, that's how I got to 4th degree black belt.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
I never knew that. So it's like a nice thing to shed some light on. All right, cool. So let's dive into a little bit about your background, how you got into the fitness industry, and how you became the professional you are now.
Awesome. Yeah. So out of high school, I actually thought I was going to be an accountant, which is very ironic because I actually hate math. But I had this cool teacher in high school, and I was like, accounting seems like a good job. Let me try that. So I went to college. My first year, you had to take some prerequisites to go into the accounting department. So it was microeconomics. And after that, I was like, this is a nightmare. Like, this is not for me. So I was working out at this World Gym near my house, and I've always played sports as a kid. I was always an athlete. So, I was always into sports and that kind of stuff. So I'm in the gym, and I see these two guys who go to my college, and they're trainers. And I was like, So I go to them. I was like, hey, what did you guys do in school to do this job? And they're like, oh, exercise science, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then literally next day, changed my major to exercise science. And 20 plus years later, here we are. That's actually more than that. Was it 2000? Yeah, 20 plus years, I think. Yeah, since I was 18. So
yeah, it's a long time to be in this industry. Most people do not last.
Since 1996. So whatever that math is, that's how long I've been doing this.
I was 5 years old.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting old, man. I'm getting old.
What would you credit your ability to last and survive in this industry for that long? Like, what was the thing that kept you going?
Honestly, it's the only thing I like to do. Like the exercise piece and the martial art piece, those have been my two passions since, 18, 22 years old. That's all I've done. Literally my whole life. I've never had another job. Like, that's it. I mean, that's not true. When I was high school, worked coffee shop here and there. But other than that, a real job, this is the only job I've ever really had, only profession. And I just I've always been into solving problems. I love the problem solving aspect of it. And that's what kept me in it. If I just did, your generic stuff that most trainers do, I'd probably be bored to tears. But I like the problem solving, the people coming to me with real problems and making a difference in their life. That's always intrigued me. And I think that's also why I love jiu-jitsu so much, because it's basically the same thing. You're solving a physical problem of an opponent trying to essentially kill you. So there's a physical chess match. And I think that's why I also gravitate towards jiu-jitsu. So they're very similar in that regard.
Yeah, that's so it sounds like you're you're essentially was no other option in your mind. It was like, I'm going to make this work no matter what. And you just kind of figured it out along the way.
That's absolutely it. There was no plan B. There was nothing else I liked. I mean, I started studying, you know, I found, you know, RTS really early. A place I worked in like 1997, you know, got me into Tom Purvis stuff, RTS stuff. And it, ever since then, literally, I got lucky at the beginning. And I just always kind of had really good mentors and programs that I kind of, you know, followed, and away we go.
Yeah. So in your words, what everyone's got a different definition for what exercise is. What would you define it as? Like, what makes up an exercise in your mind?
The easiest definition that I think is the most accurate. Now, some people argue about this. I've actually had arguments with people in the jiu-jitsu world saying that jiu-jitsu is not exercise. And they're like, what do you mean it is? For me personally, exercise is what you do to prepare for an activity of some kind. So meaning, if I want to create a certain physiologic change or some sort of specific goal, I use exercise for that. In my head, in my mind, playing a sport is not exercise. I use exercise to prepare to play that sport, or I play that sport to acquire that skill. Now, again, some people argue that, but that's, to me, what exercise is.
Sure. So the funny thing is that a lot of people don't even think like preparing for life, right? Like everyone's always talking about sports and activities, but I know you know that sometimes we got to prepare people just to do their daily living stuff. You find that to be kind of prevalent amongst people you work with?
Absolutely. It's very interesting, the amount of people that can't do things that we take for granted every day, you know, bending over, picking things up. You know, the classic example, playing with your grandkids, right? I mean, you know, throwing the ball in the backyard because they have shoulder problems. Things that you don't even think about, people that have real problems cannot do. And yeah, right. Everyone's focused on a sport or, you know, some sort of lifting goal, but really just being able to live life, you need exercises to help them do that. So that, again, that's what I think exercise is, right? It prepares you for something. You want to create a specific physiologic change. And again, that's why when people tell me they do jujitsu for exercise, I get a ton of people like that. And in their head, that's fine, because they just mean I want to move and burn calories. And if that's what exercise is for you, that's cool. But I don't think you're coming to jujitsu trying to get a specific physiologic change and doing the things necessary. You just say, I want to run, or I want to, you know, roll around, wrestle around, sweat, burn some calories, and that's my exercise. And that's fine. But to me, that's not. I do jiu-jitsu to acquire a skill of learning how to kill somebody. you know what I mean? That's jiu-jitsu for me. My exercise prepares me to be able to do that for a lifetime. So but yes, back to your original thing. Absolutely. Yes. People need exercises to do their daily life, of course.
Well, since we're on the topic though, with jiu-jitsu, like, is there because this is a big part of your business, right? Is there a particular approach when it comes to fitness in a general sense that you take with jiu-jitsu athletes, or does it still have to be super custom tailored to everybody, or is it sort of a blend between general and customization?
Great question. So I try to make everything as personal as humanly possible, but in a quote unquote class setting, there are basic movements and movement skills that are required to perform a lot of the techniques in jiu-jitsu. So from a general sense, I use that stuff a lot to prepare. So for example, if we're going to do a triangle choke, it's an easy example. If people don't know what a triangle choke is, basically you're choking somebody with your legs, kind of like in a figure four. Think of like a figure four leg lock if you're like, you know, old school WWF wrestling, right? But essentially you're choking someone with your legs. And in order to do that, your hips need to externally rotate, right? So for our warm up or for our preparation before that move, we'll get everyone externally rotating their hips, preparing their spine a certain way because they have to kind of rotate a certain way. So I view things like that instead of just throwing the technique out. I want to make sure that people actually have the prerequisites from a joint movement perspective. They can actually even get into the position. Otherwise, maybe that position is not for them. And there are some people that they just cannot rotate their hips like that. And what they're going to do is they're going to try to move their spine more. And that might lead to, again, more stress on the spine. It's unnecessary because you have someone actually on top of you trying to actually fold you up to defend. So it gets a little dicey. So that's how I use general exercise, general but specific for that move, but not necessarily so much for that person. It's just that they can't do it, then that move might not be for them.
Right. Yeah. And I can imagine that there's a lot of nuances into what each person's going to be decent at doing within the jiu-jitsu space, right? And different types of moves are going to fit different types of body structures and whatnot. But yeah, that makes sense. You're using your mechanics brain to apply it to some of the things that you have to do in those sessions. From your experience working in jiu-jitsu for so long, like, are there like 3 top types of injuries that happen often when people are doing jiu-jitsu? Like, what are the most common injuries? And then how do you address them or prepare people so that those don't happen?
Yeah, definitely. So in the jiu-jitsu world, I would say, and I actually took a poll before I opened this business about that, honestly. Low back, definitely, because you're in jiu-jitsu, you're constantly, being snapped down, being crunched, bending, twisting, like your spine is constantly being stressed. So definitely low back injuries, knee injuries, a ton, but those are more, let's call those traumatic. Those are more maybe direct contact injuries, right? The spine is more of a, how can I say, like an overuse, right, type thing. And the knee injury might be more like, got twisted, it got hit the wrong way, something popped, right? So definitely knees. And then the third one, it depends. A lot of shoulders, right? Because you're getting a lot of shoulder locks and arm bar stuff. People are popping elbows, shoulders. And a lot of people have neck stuff because again, you're getting your neck cranked on, etc. But I'd probably say definitely. Oh, you know what though? It's funny, hips as well. But hips are more like, again, over like, because now that I'm thinking about it, right? Hips are more kind of overuse though. So if I say injuries, definitely low back, knees, let's say shoulders. Boom, right there.
Yeah, it seems like everything really, except you are battling with someone, which is supposed to be for life or death in some ways. So I guess it's going to be whatever happens in the session. I'm sure it's all over the map, right?
It definitely. But if I had to pick one, I would say low back. I think that's the most stress thing, and probably the thing most people complain about.
Yeah, and that kind of just is the case even just on the day-to-day for normal people too. It seems like just an area that just gets beat up for good reasons. Switching gears for a second, like kind of thinking about the normal, like Joe Schmo, just kind of train, get into the exercise world, into the fitness industry. From your experience, what kinds of challenges do people face when entering into the fitness space, maybe not being experienced, sort of new to it? Just want to get a little stronger, get a little leaner, nothing major with their goals, but they're just starting to get their feet wet, so to speak.
Are you talking about the consumer or the professional?
Yeah, consumer.
The consumer. So I'm sorry, ask the question again. I thought you were talking about the professional.
Oh, yeah. I'm just, from your experience, like what kinds of challenges does the consumer face when they enter into the fitness space, being an inexperienced person, trying to learn how to exercise,
I got it. So you're talking about, if they don't have any help, right? They're just kind of walking into a gym, that kind of thing?
Yeah, maybe without help and maybe even with the normal traditional training model.
Got it. Yeah. So probably the biggest thing is things are not personalized for them, right? They look up a magazine or they look on Instagram or somewhere and they see an exercise and they automatically see this person doing it. So they think it's good for them. And so then they go and they try it. It might work. It might not work. They might hurt themselves. And there's a ton of information out there, a ton of also misinformation. So the consumer doesn't really know who to believe, who to trust. And I think also too, you walk into a gym by yourself, you don't know how to use a machine. People just sit down and go. They don't understand the nuances of where to sit, how to set it up, different angles, different, et cetera. So I just think the biggest thing is probably lack of information, or the correct information, and really trying to figure out what their goal is and picking things specifically for that goal, and not just some random thing that someone told them to do for no reason. Like when I see people come to me, I'll ask them, I'm like, why are you doing that? And they don't know, or they'll give some generic answer like, my butt, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, are you sure? That's not really happening there. So I think the biggest thing is probably misinformation, or inaccurate information. And again, the consumer doesn't know because that's not their profession, so they're trusting other people. And that's a whole different conversation about a million Instagram trainers and their education.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time putting my shoes in like a consumer's shoes and seeing from their eyes, because I have so much background in this. Can't imagine how difficult it is for someone who doesn't work out, who wants to get stronger, get into the gym, and then like you say, like, how do you know what information is correct? How do you trust a person? Like, it's got to be just a wild west, like, do you have any suggestions as to, like, if you are that person, what they could do to start off on the right foot?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely hire a professional. And then how do you know what professional? I mean, I would definitely read credentials. And I mean, obviously, as we know that, people can say anything. Probably the best thing is to go to somebody who looks like they're paying attention to you, right? Has some sort of extensive intake process, I guess you could say, and doesn't just throw you out there just randomly, who's not just counting reps, who again takes time to talk to you, seems like they're engaged in the session, even if they don't know as much, they don't have as much education, at least if they seem like they care, that is a good step in the right direction. That's what I would look for. And then also too, if I'm in there and things hurt and the trainer doesn't adjust it or doesn't know how to adjust it, that might be a little red flag. Like, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah. That's some really good advice. And what you're saying is, if there's pain in exercise, that's not something you should just ignore. And maybe you need to make a change. And if the professional or yourself are not doing that, then you might want to second guess that whole thing. That's some good gold nuggets there, man. Yeah. These days, it seems harder and harder for people to be consistent when they train. Like, in your opinion, why do you think it's so hard for people to stay consistent within their exercise process?
It's a great question. Honestly, I think, and this is just from my personal experience, and now that I've opened this facility, I'm seeing more and more people, and people want results yesterday. You know what I mean? Like, if they're not getting what they think they should get at the speed they think they should get it, it deters them, right? So again, let's use weight loss. It really is an example most people understand. If someone, say, wants to lose 50 pounds, if they're not losing what they think they should lose right away, they get discouraged. But they don't realize, number one, how long it took them to gain the 50 pounds. Number two, a lot of it's trial and error. You don't know. You can give people certain foods, caloric values, et cetera. But it's like anything. You got it. There has to be a trial and error period to see what is appropriate. How many calories they're actually burning. Are they lying about what they're consuming, et cetera. So people have to be a little more patient, I think, in their expectations of how fast things are going to change. Even muscle building, right? People think they're going to build these muscles in like 2 weeks. I'm like, man, it's not that easy. Not to mention, what is your genetics? Like, you might be capped out. You know what I'm saying? Like for me personally, like, I've been lifting weights since I was 18 years old. I mean, besides, a little bigger here and there, I look the same. no matter how much I lift or don't lift or eat or don't eat or whatever the case may be, I've pretty much been the same size for 20 something years. I just think that's just my genetics. Now, maybe could I go crazy and like get really crazy about it? But I just think people have false expectations about how fast things should happen and also what is even possible to happen. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that? Or
yeah, it sounds like you really have to, at the beginning with someone, paint a picture of what might be their expectations, make sure they understand that it's a certain type of way and maybe not what they think it's going to be, so that there's no, confusion about how things are going to move forward. You think
I mean, the old cliche, right? Like, this is a lifestyle now, right? This is a lifestyle. This is not a diet. This is not a workout plan, right? This is a lifestyle, and there's going to be ups and downs. And, your goal is to get a little better each day. Or quite honestly, Greg Mack says this a lot. One of our colleagues, mentors, Greg Mack, he says, we want to, how's he word it? Essentially, we want to optimally decline, right? Mm-hmm. As we get older, right, we don't want to drop off a cliff, right? We want to, try to keep it as even keel as we can. But I mean, let's be honest, as we get older, things are starting to dip down, right? So we want to have an optimal decline, and that's progress for a lot of people. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, you're saying like the idea of senescence, as we get older, our strength and abilities will go down, but let's try to keep that decline slower so we can maintain our, independence and ability to do our daily living stuff, like go to the grocery store, drive our car, take a walk, like not have to be pushed in a wheelchair, that kind of thing. It seems so small, but man, when you get into your 80s, that ain't a small thing.
And that's the thing that people don't realize, man. Like a lot of people, like I see people in their 50s come to see me, 60s, 70s. I had a woman who was almost 70. I mean, she acts like she's 25. I'm like, you're not 25 anymore. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you that. Like, your hip is not 25 anymore. That's just the reality. So I just think really setting expectations with people has to be done. And they have to really understand the process of what they're asking for. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's really important for people to realize that your training needs to be adjusted as you age, adjust for where you're at, because you shouldn't be doing what you were doing when you were 20. If you're 75, like you're saying, that's going to come with some baggage of problems that you don't want. So you mentioned, people come to see you. Like, why? What kind of people come to see you? Why do people come to Theorem Fitness?
So it's funny you asked that. So I'll tell you why. The majority of my career has always been people that have some kind of pain or movement issues. Since I moved to Florida and opened this facility, I'd probably say at least half or more than half have come to me for weight loss, which I never got a lot of those people coming up. Quite honestly, I was always like solving the pain and movement problems. But then I realized these people, yes, they're coming for weight loss, but a lot of times the reason they can't lose the weight is because of how they worked out in the past, because of injury, because of they can't move their bodies the way they want to move. So it's kind of all the same. It's just in their head, instead of playing with their grandkids, they don't feel good and they want to lose the weight, right? Mm-hmm. But the exercise prescription, or the way we think about exercise, is the same. It's just the food. You know what I mean? Like, you want to lose weight, it's about the food. The exercise is a supplement to that, to make you be able to stay active, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think just in Florida, people are more active anyway, right? It's warm all the time. You're in California. I'm sure it's the same way, right? So people are active. A lot of the older people, they're walking around. They want to stay active. And if they gain a little weight, you're always in shorts here, bathing suits, et cetera. So that's a big thing for people. So I probably think that's why I've gotten more of those people than I normally do. But they come in with the same problems. I mean, it's just their goal is just a little different.
Yeah, you're marrying these two worlds together. Let's lose weight, look good, but also let's not kill your joints and be able to continue and sustain the progress, because that is like a pitfall in the boot camp style training. Like, just kill yourself and then you got to rest for a week, and then that can't sustain that. That doesn't lead to the results people want.
That's exactly what I found, is that people come to see me and they want to, again, lose weight. And I'm like, what have you done? And they're like, oh, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And it's all the same thing. It's like they start off hot, right? And then they get hurt, and it's a downward spiral, right? So again, it goes back to the exercise being inappropriate for them. So that's a big thing.
So touching base on what you mentioned, people getting hurt and whatnot, I mean, from what you've seen, like in the gym setting, I know it's gonna be hard to answer, but if you can name maybe 3 top reasons why people might be getting hurt within their exercise, what comes to mind for you?
So number 1, too fast. Like, I think people just fling weights, even if you're doing a quote unquote bad exercise, right? However you want to define that. If you do it super slow, the odds of getting hurt diminish, exponentially, as opposed to just flinging weights everywhere, right? As you well know. So I think if people just slow down in general, they wouldn't get hurt nearly as much. The same with jiu-jitsu, right? That's why the white belts, people call them spazzy white belts, because they're crazy, right? Not, it's like the old expression, speed kills, right? The fall is not what kills you, it's how fast you fall, right? So I think if people slow down, what else? I think that's the easiest thing for people to do without getting too technical about, your moment arms, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if you just slow down, it will limit a ton of the injuries that people are having.
Yeah. That's like almost every client I get is like one of the first things that we have to address is tempo and stops and starts, and then we go from there, because that's kind of a critical component. It's not to say, like, I'm sure you don't think that going fast is bad, but it's like how you're going fast and how in control you are and all that.
I was going to say, right? it's about the control. So let's put those together, right? Slow it down, have control. If you want to go faster, you got to be able to control it. If you can't control it, it's over.
Yeah, 100%. So, when thinking about working with people with injuries and whatnot, even if that's not your main component necessarily anymore, it's still a part of your model. And you're going to get people, I'm sure, who've gone through the whole rehab like cycle, working with PTs and whatnot, maybe not getting what they want or being fully better. From your experience of understanding the rehab space, like what kinds of issues do you see existing within rehab exercise and physical therapy and whatnot that most people have to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the same thing. Generic protocols, right? I get people all the time. And again, this is not to say anything bad about PTs. I'm sure there's good PTs, bad PTs. It's not about PT. It's about how the system is set up, right? Most of the stuff is a protocol. It's a generic protocol based on insurance. You get X amount of sessions, and then you leave, whether you're ready, not ready, et cetera. So, some people go to PT, they get great results. Some people go and they don't get anything. So a lot of people that have come to see me, I've asked them, what have you done? Well, I've done PT, I've done this, I've done that. And it's just, the things are not specific to the people, their history, their structure, where they're at, their current problems. So things have to be specific to the person, in my opinion, to get the results that people are looking for. Again, could you get away with generic exercise? Of course. But if it doesn't work, you gotta narrow it down to specifically why you are having the problem and design things for that human.
Yeah. And that can look like a lot of things, right? I mean, you can be doing one exercise with 6 people and they all could need that exercise, but then the way that they go about doing it, what they have to think about, how they have to execute it, all those little things change. And that's sort of what you're leaning into a little bit, I think, right?
Exactly, right? It's not the what, it's the how, right? If I say, you should squat, you said line up 10 people in a row, you're going to see 10 different variations of that squat. And I might tell this person to do it this way, this person to do that, but to the outsider, it still looks like a squat.
Yeah.
But this specific, the how is specific to that human based on all the other factors we talked about, before.
Yeah. I mean, and I know, it gets even crazier than that, and it could get really specific and weird for each person if we want it to be. And that can be valuable also, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole confusing component for people. people can be committed. They can be doing the thing consistent 4 days a week, months at a time, never stop, and they still don't seem to be getting the results they want from their exercise. If we're thinking of a specific example, like you mentioned, body fat, and this person's committed to their training, I guess, why do you feel like people maybe don't see results in their exercise? And maybe body fat's not the best one because that's nutrition dependent, but maybe more like strength gains or movement improvements. A person is training, why might they not be seeing changes and benefits from their training?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So it's a couple things. We'll talk about strength hypertrophy first, because that's kind of easier.
Yeah.
I think people forget the nutrition aspect of these things, right? They just think, I'm going to go in the gym, I'm just going to lift and everything's going to be good. But, if your hormone levels are off, if you are not getting the proper nutrition, if you're not getting enough protein, if you're stressed at work, right? Your cortisol levels are crazy raised, right? All these things are going to affect what happens, right? You can't it's not just lift and everything is great, because if that was the case, everybody would be jacked, right? Like it's not that easy, right? So, a lot of nutrition, I think, gets neglected a lot, especially when people want these aesthetic changes, right? This strength, this hypertrophy, it gets neglected. Rest, right? All these variables, I think people don't look at closely enough.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as movement goes, those kinds of things, that is so subjective because we can't see inside this person. So we don't even know if their body is even able to move more right now. That's why the idea of quality, the idea of how does that feel to you, might be more important than increasing a certain range or a certain amount of motion, because we don't know, we don't have x-ray eyes. We don't know if their joint is even capable of moving more based on their structure, based on their history, based on all the stress they've had in their lives. So in that aspect, that's tough to tell.
Yeah.
Tough to,
Yeah. I hear
out.
you saying that maybe results come in different forms. If we're paying attention, you might be seeing results that are minute and different just by sensational changes, quality of motion, control factors. Like all these things actually show you're getting better. Whether you're lifting more weight or not necessarily isn't the only thing to think about. It makes it a little richer, right? I think that's pretty brilliant right there.
Yeah, that's why a lot of times, again, back to the weight loss things, this is, people understand it's easy. The scale is only one aspect, right? That's why you got to take some measurements, take some body fat, right? There's all these factors, how your clothes fit, right? Your weight might be, because I always ask people, right? This is this question I've asked, and someone told me this a long time ago, and it's so true. Someone comes to you and says they want to lose 20 pounds. And I say, okay, if you looked exactly how you look right now, but 20 pounds less, would you be happy? And of course, everybody says no. So I'm like, it's not 20 pounds that you care about. It's this vision you have of yourself, right? It's, can you fit in this size 4? Can you do this? Can you do that? So I think, again, back to there's a lot of success in things that aren't exactly black and white, right? Like it's not just, I lost, I'm not successful if I didn't lose 20 pounds. I only lost 5. Yeah, but you lost 2 inches and you fit in your clothes better, right? So, but I think the biggest thing with the motion, I think that is true. I think if you feel better, if the sensation is different, that is improvement, because you might not ever get more. Like that just might be your joint at this time in your life.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people think they're just gonna magically start to move more, but there are limitations to the structures of your body, and that could be just you, especially if it's bilateral, right and left the same. Now, if you got one side it's very different than the other, maybe there's something there, but yeah, it's a rabbit hole. I mean, it's always people like, my hamstrings are tight. I'm like, well, is it one side or both sides? And they're like, oh, it's always both sides. Were you born that way? It's always been that way? Yeah, it's always been that way. Well, okay, that might just be you.
I know, and people have a hard time grasping that concept. They're like, this might just be your reality. Like this is, I don't know. This is it. Again, if you're born with a certain, pelvis this way or this way or this way, your range of motion is going to look different. Like that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know. I can't see inside of you, so I don't know. But all I know is this is what it is. If it doesn't hurt, you feel better. That's all we can go on.
Yeah, 100%. Subjective feedback is one of the best methods for determining if you're going the right way. You mentioned on like data measurements and kind of talking about data collection. So in that light, like what types of data points do you collect with people that you're working with, someone new? And then like, why is it important for you to collect some of those data points?
So health history, obviously huge data point. I need to know, what I'm dealing with, what history you've had. I think that's huge. I ask us a ton of questions about that. People leave out so many things that they don't think are important to why they're there, right? Like, they're there for back pain, but they don't want to tell me that they broke their foot, 20 years ago. I'm like, well, that could definitely affect your back pain, right? So I like to collect as much data as I can. I like to see how they're moving, side to side, to see if there's a difference, if things hurt, what doesn't hurt. I ask a lot of questions about what can't you do that you want to do, what hurts, what certain things hurt you. Really, what would you like to do? And I think I used to give people a lot of what I thought they should have. And I still do, but I'm way more, what do you want to do? Right? Like it's not what I care about. What do you care about? And that is a very important conversation because they'll say things and I'm like, that's what you care about? Oh, okay. Like, you know what I mean? But like, to me, I wouldn't care about that, but I'm not, I'm not the customer. They are. So if that's what they want, that's what I'm going to give them. As far as a goal, right? Like if they say, like I have a guy right now who, he just started cycling and he wants to get better at cycling and he's got a bad shoulder, a bad this, bad that. He's like, I don't care. I want to get better at cycling. I'm like, okay. It's like I used to argue with these people, but I'm like, listen, that's going to make him happy. That's what he wants. Of course, we're going to mix in the shoulder stuff too. But if his main fundamental objective is I want to be able to cycle for 10 miles without getting tired, then guess what? Everything we do is going to be based on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So anyway, back to your data points. So yeah, I'm collecting as much data really about what they want to do, how they're moving, how they're feeling. And also the biggest thing too that I do now more than I used to is I don't keep people on a table for a long period of time. I'll look at range of motion on a table, but I also look at it off a table because they're different. Because again, people aren't laying on a table when they're doing things. They're moving, right? So they're standing, they're sitting, they're doing different things. So I'll check range of motion in various configurations, in various positions to get a different sense of what's going on. Those are probably the main things I do. And each session, as you know, each session is pretty much its own data collection. But at the beginning, it's really about the health history, why they're there, and how their overall movement is in a laying down situation and a standing moving type situation.
Yeah. Everything you said is very insightful, especially with the idea of goals. And it kind of reminds me back in the day when I worked with Jock Taylor for a little bit. And back then, it was like 8 years ago, I had a goals of like kind of college football goals of like want to bench a certain number, squat. And he would ask me like, why is that important to you? I couldn't come up with the answer. And immediately then everything shifted and all my goals went out the window and I started rethinking about what was important to me. But to your point, like you got to give people space for what they want, maybe ask some, engaging questions to see if they think about it, if it changes anything, and it might not. And you just got to go with what they really want. Right. And maybe trickle in what they need. Correct.
Or at least you give them that. And then on their own, they realize, oh yeah, my shoulder might be an issue. Yeah, could we do something with that? You know what I mean? So it's like sometimes you gotta let people almost figure stuff out on themselves instead of trying to force it down their throat. Like I'll do an exercise with this guy for his shoulder, and then he realizes, oh wow, this does feel different.
Mm.
I'm like, that's interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like they have to kind of discover it on their own instead of me telling them, listen, you know, this shoulder needs some help. They need to feel something, I think, because otherwise, if they don't specifically feel something, it's not real to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned health history, and I mostly want to touch on injury history because that was something you just glossed over. And I think it would be useful for people to just have a little background as to why it might be important. Like in your eyes, like why should someone care about their own injury history when it comes to their training?
Well, I mean, once you're injured, your physiology changes now, right? So once we're born a certain way, and as you get these, you know, scars, things change. You know what I mean? Like if your ankle is not moving the way it used to move, you might have to put a little weight on one side compared to the other. That might put more stress in the knee, more stress in the hip, up the back, up the whole chain, right? This whole idea. So everything matters. Like I tore my pec fighting in like 2007. And there's like a little hole in it. I mean, it's not like a big hole, but there's a little divot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I lift or I do jujitsu, like this elbow, this pec, it's you know, I feel myself kind of doing stuff like that when I'm lifting. So it affects, you know, a lot of stuff I do. You know, my arms, I don't know if you can see it. My arms don't even, it's blurry. My arms don't even straighten out anymore from jujitsu. That also affects, you know, shoulders, chest, right? So if I can't press as much, it's not so much my chest muscles are weak per se. It's like my elbow muscles cannot support that. So I have to compensate in other ways. And I don't want to do that. But my point is, it affects everything, right? So if I come in and say my shoulder hurts, you know, maybe it's because my elbows don't straighten out. Or if I say my knee hurts, maybe it's because I twisted my ankle back in the day and I had to put more stress on one side, which in turn, you know, put more stress on that knee,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. So the short answer, sorry, is once we have an injury, it affects the rest of the system affects the rest of the system in general. Yeah. So everything counts, basically. It's an accumulation of your battle scars in your life. It all counts.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure you've done this too, is you can clearly see that with some of the things we do. We can test for strength in the body manually with our hands, and we can take an injury and we can place stress through that injury, and it will just weaken parts of the body in such weird ways that don't seem so obvious. And if it's happening in a controlled setting lying down, it's probably happening in the gym in some way or form. So it's definitely like a powerful thing. And it's funny, people just forget about their injuries. They don't even remember half the time. You have to almost like coach them through it and think about it. And it's just sort of a forgotten, really important piece of information.
No, absolutely. Like you get people all the time and they'll say something like, you know, you find a quote unquote weakness in, let's say, their right knee. They're like, well, my left knee hurts. I'm like, maybe, and again, who knows? Maybe your left knee hurts because your right knee is so weak that your left knee is a left knee and a right knee. You know, this is a generic example, but people have these things like, wait a minute, why is that weak, but this hurts? Again, pain is a sensation. You know, we have that whole rabbit hole, but people don't realize that everything is linked together, right? We are one big system with a ton of subsystems, and everything counts. Everything works together. And, you know, just because you have pain in one area does not mean there is a problem in that area. Just like if you have a herniated disc, it doesn't automatically mean you will have pain in your back, right? There are people that have 0 herniated discs and have a ton of pain in their back. There are people who have multiple herniated discs and have no pain in their back. So, you know, the old expression, you are not your MRI, I find more and more true on a daily basis.
Yeah. And there's plenty of cited research articles supporting that statement. It's a very common phenomenon because, yeah, it manifests in a lot of different ways. So while we're on this, you know, topic of pain, when you're in a session and you have a client tell you something hurts and it's more of an acute thing, like not something that's normally happened for them, what might you do in that circumstance?
So the first thing I do is I change the range of motion, or I change the configuration. So let's say, easy the idea, you say you're doing exercise where, you're bending your elbow. It hurts at the end. Okay. If you just bend 5 degrees less, does that hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. 10 degrees less, does that hurt? No. Okay. So it only hurts in this 10-degree range. Yes. Okay. Let's try to get that 10 degrees better somehow, right? Or so it has less pain. So that's that's my go-to of let's limit the range of motion and see if that changes anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we figure out, okay, well, it's not this full motion, it's only part of the motion, but it's only this segment of the motion that hurts. Why is that? I don't know. Let's play with some stuff and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually my go-to is I limit the range, or I will change a position, meaning this gets a little more technical, but
mm-hmm.
Here we are. So if let's say hip abduction hurts, and no matter what part of the range it hurts, they'll say, okay, maybe I'll internally rotate the hip and do the same abduction. Does that hurt? No, that feels good. Interesting. Externally rotate. How's that feel? That hurts too. Okay, so internal doesn't hurt. There too hurt. But then I start to just troubleshoot kind of stuff like that, and just see if I add a different plane into the motion. Does that change? Because that might change. How
mm-hmm.
the bones are moving inside, etc. Maybe something's not rubbing on something. I don't know, but I'll play with stuff that way. Those are kind of my go-tos if someone says they have pain, or if this hurts overall, I just won't do it and go to something else, and then come back to it later and think about what possibly, because also again the session, they're paying for the session, so it's not just they want to quote unquote work out, right? So I can't sit there for an hour and be like, this is one thing. Let's make a note, move on, do something else doesn't hurt, and then come back to another time when I have more time to kind of think about it and process it and go from there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you see this too, because as soon as I started realizing that you can modify the ranges, work around the pain, and it's so crazy. You start doing that, you start conditioning it, you stay away from the pain, it starts to go away and almost completely goes away most of the time, unless there's something seriously going on. But if it's not like a physical material issue, most of the time that stuff starts to work out. But
I think how I used to be was, I want to hit these grand slams, right? I got to fix this pain. And what I realized is, listen, this is going to take time, and I'm not going to waste their time trying to be this fixer. Let's do things that don't hurt you. And then slowly, like I said, as we go, and then come back next time, hey, let's do the same position again. Then miraculous, sometimes, yeah, you're right. It doesn't hurt anymore. You're like, but we didn't do anything. Well, we did. We just did other things, and that made it feel better. How that happened, can I tell you 100%? No idea. I don't care, though. Does that feel good to you? Feels good. Let's move on. You know what I mean?
That was like Tom's thing. It was always confusing when you first start the class, an RTS, resistance training specialist. He would just say, you got to do what people can tolerate and what they can own. And it's at first you're like, okay, that seems obvious, but this is what we're talking about. Is if you have pain in some specific position, you're not tolerating it very well. Let's do what you can do. And eventually that stuff will get better. And if it doesn't, then maybe we could play some games to try to figure out how to make it better if it's important. But like you say, you don't have to belabor it. It doesn't have to be the whole session.
Yeah, again, you don't, the idea of being a fixer, a healer, all these things that I when I was younger, really, thought I was. And then again, the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much. And if you think you're fixing things, you just got to give people an appropriate amount of stress for whatever goal they want. And if they feel good, that's the body's way of being that's good. The old sun, Tom always talk about this sunburn, right? I use that analogy a lot of times with my clients. You might go in the sun for 2 hours and you get tan, golden brown, beautiful. You go in the sun for 3 hours, burnt to a crisp. All that means is not the sun is not bad. It's the fact that your body cannot handle 3 hours if somebody can handle 2 hours. So only go 2 hours until you can move it up and, quote unquote, micro progress it up the chain, that kind of thing. But yeah, and I think that gets lost a lot. Is people want to hit these grand slams and home runs, and they want to fix things and all these things. And it's like, man, do what people can do, and then slowly build, dose, and eventually, hopefully, people start feeling great.
Yeah. It's not as sexy, but that is really the majority of how things work with the body. Is you can't wrestle it in submission like a jiu-jitsu match.
Exactly. Because what happens is that's a great analogy. What happens is you stress it out so much, like you're the hip analogy. Their hip hurts, so you just keep playing with their hip for an hour. They're gonna be dead. Like even if you're doing the right thing, just the fatigue of it, they can't tolerate that much stress. It's gonna kill them just on that level. You know what I mean? So it's like you can't. And again, I learned that stuff the hard way, but
yeah, me too. I've done it to myself many times.
20 plus years doing this, that's what you learn.
So this kind of lends into this idea of physical resiliency, right? Like in your mind, like what does being resilient mean, and then how can you make a system, a body, more resilient to stress and force?
So we'll use jiu-jitsu as a perfect example of this. So I teach a beginner's course, and the reason I do that is I found a huge hole in the jiu-jitsu community. Most schools, again, not all, most, you're a new student, they might have a white belt class, and that's fine, but most students get thrown in with the wolves, and it's like feast or famine. The tough ones will stick it out, getting smashed every day, sore every day, and they'll stick it out. That's kind of how I came up. The other ones are going to quit. They're going to leave. That's why most schools you see are all white and blue belts. Blue belt's the second belt. It's all beginners because there's a 90% attrition rate between white and blue belt. So that basically means that 10% of people get to the second belt in jiu-jitsu because of this. And I'm getting to a point, trust me. They're put into a situation they cannot tolerate. So when I created this beginner's course, I created with people just like each other. Everyone's like each other, same environment, and we're not only teaching jiu-jitsu, but I'm also preparing their bodies for the stresses of jiu-jitsu. So in a typical, white belt match is a 5-minute match, right? So you go to most schools, you're going to do 5 to 10 minute rounds. That's a typical fight, right? 5-10 minutes. But these guys can't tolerate 30 seconds, right? So my beginner's course, like literally rounds are 30 seconds to a minute. And sometimes that's too much. And I could tell by, how they respond, cut it out, next time do less. Again, same analogy, kind of like the sunburn. Mm-hmm. So to build the resilience, you start from the bottom and you slowly, again, using Tom Purvis' word, micro progress up. And again, you're right. It's not sexy. People are like, I want to fight. Why only fighting for 30 seconds? That's all your body can handle.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do that, you're going to come in the next day. You're going to feel like you're going to look like you're dead. You're going to be sore as hell. You're not going to show back up. So not only from a business model is it stupid, but just from a physical, stress model, it's stupid. So I think, in order to build resilience, it's just the same idea. You dose appropriately, little by little, and then they get better and better and better and better. And that's how eventually you build the resistance to quote unquote fatigue, or the resistance to whatever word you want to use. But that's how I think about it, especially in the jiu-jitsu setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it is the essence of what training is supposed to be. That's why consistency is so important, is you have to have that regular stimulus at an appropriate level that you can recover from to then go to those upper levels of challenge. But if you exceed that, you're going to know, like, what kind of ways, what kind of sensations, what things do you look for to determine someone's not tolerating something?
So, great question. In jiu-jitsu, a lot of it is more cardio based, right? Because you can see, right? They're breathing heavy. You can see the tension, right? They're just like, they're going, you know, and then after a minute, they're like, they look like they're going to die. I'm like, probably too much, right? So from that standpoint, I do that. That's also why my warm-ups are very joint specific to what we're doing that day. And even the training sessions are, so most schools, say you learn a triangle choke, okay? That's the technique you learn for the day. But then when you start to train, right, you know, sparring, let's call it, you start wrestling. Now, that is a part of jiu-jitsu, of course, but the techniques you were learning that day were triangle chokes. And now when you go to spar, you're wrestling. So that's the most schools do it that way. So what I like to do is what they call situational training. Now, more schools are adapting this because it's people are realizing it's far better. Where if we train triangle chokes that day, we're going to train in a position where you're either defending or going for the triangle choke, but with more resistance, right? So we are training the things that essentially our bodies have been prepared, warmed up, and now we're putting a little more stress into the system instead of doing something and now doing a completely different thing that we were not prepared for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So that's another way how I like to build a resilience, and also can see if this person is just not there, if their body, even in the warm-up, I can tell if they don't have the joint motion for that thing. I'm like, when we're training, I'm very careful about who to put them with and what to do. A lot of those people I'll train with them because I can give them a little bit of stress and they can kind of, you know, they're not going to hurt themselves.
So it sounds like in that jiu-jitsu sense, if you were to transfer it to the exercise space, it would be kind of like if you see someone whose motion quality is going down, the range of motion is going down, or if they report pain, or they're distracted, or they're breathing too heavy and they can't do the thing well, those are all kind of indications this is maybe too much. And of course, how they're recovering, right? That's another thing.
In a pure exercise setting, I use control as my barometer for most things. Well, control and pain, right? If something hurts, we stop right away. But if it doesn't hurt, it's the control, right? It's like, you know, again, back to Tom Purvis, there's a lot of this thing, right? It's your first rep looks like your last rep, right? If it doesn't, the set's over. You know what I mean? If they're starting out, you know, boom, 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 then all of a sudden they're like, you know, it's over, right? So in the exercise setting, I would use control. Throw pain aside for a second. I would use control as the number one thing I look for, whether to stop a set or the set's over, it's too much, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it can get more granular than that, but I think that's a great one for people to take home because they can do that easily without getting too technical.
Exactly.
You know, we're getting close to the end here, but I'm curious, is there anything new and interesting that you're currently exploring right now in your world?
Well, you know, the beginner's course is a big thing that I'm working on from a jiu-jitsu standpoint. But I've recently, interestingly enough, right, been getting a lot of views on social media for a lot of exercise posts I've done. So I'm putting together kind of an online, because a lot of these people are not in my area. So I want to be able to help them as best I can and put things together that are not too generic, where they're general ideas that they can tailor to themselves. And that's very hard to do. But I want to give them tools where they can self-assess themselves and they can, you know, make little changes based on what they find in their own bodies. And I think that will help them in the long term because now they can at least on a general level help themselves, again, without it being super, super specific, but also not being crazy, crazy general. They can be, you know, their own advocate for their own bodies. And also what I found, honestly, is a lot of people online, they just need to move, right? And if I give them specific movements that the joints do, no matter who you are, this is what a shoulder does this, a hip does this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Assuming, again, there's no abnormalities, etc. But again, it's online, so you can't be that crazy.
Mhm.
But if I know your hip internally rotates, externally rotates, flexes, extends, abducts, blah, 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 then if you just do those motions, but on a daily basis and figure out which ones don't feel the best and maybe work on those a little bit with some isometrics, etc.
Mhm.
I think that can make huge impacts on people's lives. So that's kind of what I've been working on, a system to kind of do that for the online space that is easy to understand, but also can be highly beneficial without me actually being there with them.
Got it. So it's like instructional videos to do some sort of range of motion assessment, quality, sensation, left to right. And then if you notice a difference, here's an intervention to try to improve it and work on it for a little while. That's brilliant, man. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, it's not super complicated. It's a little legwork on your end. But so when do you expect to have that up?
I'm hoping in the next few months, just to kind of get it all up and running. It takes a little time, just kind of like the labor of it. Getting it there, and obviously mixed in with my other responsibilities are actually live, clients, etc., and teaching stuff. So within the next few months, hopefully it'll all be done and ready to roll out. So I'm kind of excited about it.
Okay, where can people when that gets kicked off, and also just to learn more about your business, where can people find you?
Yeah, so if you are a jiu-jitsu person watching this, you can go to thetheoremclub.com. I'm sure Eric will kind of put a link maybe somewhere for it, or you can see on the screen how to spell Theorem, right? Thetheoremclub.com. If you're a fitness person, purely fitness, you can go to theoremfit.com. But either way, either website, well, the fit has no jiu-jitsu. The Theorem Club has fitness and jiu-jitsu. So you can go to either of those, or you can go on my Instagram, at the Theorem Club. And Facebook, same thing, or it'll be, Theorem Fitness and Jiu-Jitsu Club. So if you type any of those in, you can find me anywhere.
Yeah. Check out Dom's Facebook. He's got tons of videos on there and like a solid following, lots of great content. He's got some gold nuggets for you guys. So I would definitely check it out.
Appreciate that, brother.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, so thank you for coming on, offering your insights and whatnot. And maybe we can set one of these up in the future.
Yeah, man, it was awesome. I appreciate you having me. I hope people got something out of it.
Oh, I'm sure they did, man. We had a lot of good things we got to discuss in this interview. So I'm gonna let you go, but thanks again, man. And we'll be doing one in the future. You have a great weekend.
Yeah, man. Thank you too.